Hi, my name is Dale. I'm one of the pastors here at Redeemer Bible Church, and thanks for joining me for another daily word. We are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 today, really where Paul kind of bookends what he started in chapter 8, the idea about what does it mean to eat meat that's sacrificed to idols, and through chapter 9 he talks about like I have a right to do things as a Christian, as an apostle, but I lay those rights down to make sure people don't stumble. And now he, in chapter 10, really kind of puts a book in, like I said, on the common theme that we as Christians need to live our lives for Christ and for others, that we should not live our lives for ourselves. Even so much so, we should be willing to lay down any rights we have, any liberty we have for the good and for the sake of others. That's really what's happening here in chapter 10. But it's interesting. Paul starts off chapter 10 kind of with a reality check, right? So he, again, remember who he's dealing with. He's dealing with a hodgepodge, as we talked about earlier this week, of different kinds of believers. You have Jews there, you have Greeks, you have again other regions that are all coming into Corinth, and they're this melting pot of a bunch of different cultures, a bunch of different backgrounds and experiences. And he's saying, he's kind of setting the record straight, maybe because some of the Jews are bragging, I'm not sure, but he says, listen, God wasn't pleased with all the Jews. There were many Jews that would not be counted as children of God. Those are not my words. That's what the text is saying here in chapter 10. And Paul really goes to, I think he spends almost, maybe it's 10 verses on this. Like, I think it's 13 verses actually, that there's a danger in falling into sin based on your standing with God. Like if you're an Israelite, be careful. No. There is a reality that a lot of Israelites didn't make it through the desert, the wilderness, and they were taken out by God. And then God allowed even the destroyer to take some of them out as well. So Paul's kind of saying, hey, listen, your lineage isn't 100%, right? I mean, even drawing to the understanding that that it was the Jews who wanted to crucify Christ, and they manipulated and used the Romans not to give any kind of free pass to Pilate or the Romans, but they wanted Christ dead. They wanted Christ dead. And so Paul's just saying, listen, the lineage of being a Jew doesn't mean anything outside of Christ. And I think that was an interesting way to kind of, it wasn't really a detour, but it was more of it seems like more of a, hey, reality check here. Nobody really has a reason to boast. We boast in Christ, as Paul says in other passages. The one part of this passage I want to just kind of work our way through is verse 26, I believe. Yeah, so let's start in let's just start in verse 23 and work our way to the end of the passage, and I'll just briefly talk about a couple of things. Paul says this: all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Again, here's that common theme. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. So listen, go ahead, buy the meat. Don't raise any questions on the ground of conscience, right? Don't ask where the meat came from. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you, don't ask a question, without raising any question on the ground of conscience. Like, hey, thanks for inviting me to your home, but where did you buy this meat? Don't do that, Paul says. But, this is interesting. Paul says this, but if someone says to you, if that host says to you, hey, come to my house, and then he says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, Paul says this: do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informs you and for the sake of conscience. So now Paul is saying, listen, don't eat it now. Now don't eat the meat, because this guy's telling you where he got it and he's testing you. Is this Christian going to eat this meat that's been sacrificed to false gods? Paul says don't eat it. Verse 29. I do not mean your conscience, but his. Meaning, I don't want you to cause that guy to stumble over Christianity. Like, who are these guys who proclaim Christ and they're holy, but yet they're going to eat meat to demons? Continuing in verse 29, for why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all for the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything. I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. So Paul pulls it back again. Like, everything I'm doing it for the sake of the gospel. Whether it's I'm eating meat, not eating meat, whether I'm not taking funds to live on from the church, regardless, I am doing everything that I do so that they may be saved. That is Paul's heart. And again, that should be our heart. We want people to be saved. So we need to be careful. We need to be discerning as Christians. What are we participating in? Is there some real world examples even for the 21st century in this? Sure there are. Sure there are. Christians get invited into things of this world all the time, because we're being watched and we're being tested. And Paul's saying very clearly, listen, if you're in a situation where you have somebody testing you to see how you're going to respond as a Christian, he's saying, no, don't participate. Take a stand for the gospel. So earlier in the book, in chapter 8, he says, knowledge puffs up. And if you're being motivated by your knowledge, don't do that. But here in chapter 10, knowledge doesn't puff up, knowledge protects. Reminds me of the Proverbs. Reading a lot of the Proverbs, it's the situation and the context matters, where how wisdom is going to play out and how wisdom is going to be understood and practiced. So, I was thinking earlier today, I'm the one who assigns all the daily words to the pastors and here on staff, and I'm wondering why I picked these passages for myself, these particular chapters in 1 Corinthians. I'm sure I didn't think about it. We just kind of did an order, and the chips, kind of fell where they were. But there's been a lot of difficult truths so far in this week's reading, from sexual immorality to divorce and or staying married to unbelievers, to not eating or eating meat sacrificed to idols, Christian liberty versus responsibility towards others, and then obviously living our lives for others and making much of Christ and much of the gospel so that people would be saved. Just a lot of meat in 1 Corinthians. And Paul, he's going to keep swinging tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about in 1 Corinthians 11, we're going to talk about women in the church. Yeah, I'm glad I chose myself for this. We'll talk to you guys later.